All right, let's look at your work from part 2. Number 1, some arguments, while not completely valid, are almost valid. That is false, right? Because validity and invalidity, they're like on-off switches. It is either valid or it is invalid. It's not almost valid or sort of valid, because when we talk about a valid argument, we're talking about an argument in which it's 100% impossible for that conclusion to be false when the premises are assumed to be true. Okay, so number 1 is false. Number 2 is true. If a deductive argument has true premises and a false conclusion, it is necessarily invalid. Yeah, that's the definition of an invalid argument. Number 3, a valid argument may have a false premise and a false conclusion. And number 4 says a valid argument may have a false premise and a true conclusion, and those are both true. And you've got examples here on the screen. The first argument says, if we're talking about logic, then we're having a party. We're talking about logic, therefore we're having a party. That's a valid argument. If the premises are true, that conclusion necessarily follows. And the second premise is true, but probably we would all agree, unless you're a weirdo like me, if we're talking about logic, it's not the case that we're having a party. So the first premise is false and the conclusion is false, because we're not having a party, only I'm having the party here. And in the second example here, we have an illustration of a valid argument that has a false premise and a true conclusion. If we're not talking about logic, then we're not having a party. We're having a party, therefore we're talking about logic. So we could probably even argue here that both the premises here are false, but the conclusion is true. But they're nonetheless both valid arguments. Sound argument may be invalid. A sound argument may have a false conclusion. No, both false. Because remember, every sound argument is a valid argument. Okay, so we know there's no such thing as a sound argument that's invalid. So that tells us number 5 is false. And a valid argument is one in which the conclusion has to be true when the premises, the conclusion has to be true when the premises are true. So a sound argument would be a valid argument, so it couldn't have a false conclusion. Because if it's valid, the conclusion has to be true when the premises are true, and if it's sound, all the premises are true. If an argument has true premises and a true conclusion, we can know it's a perfectly good argument. No, false. Here's a good argument that has true premises and a true conclusion, and it is not a perfectly good argument. If you're swimming in a pool right now, then you're not in logic class at CR. You're not swimming in a pool right now. Therefore, you are in logic class at CR. No, doesn't work that way. This is an invalid argument, okay? But by coincidence, all of the premises and the conclusion happen to be true statements, okay? So number 7 is false. Number 8, a statement may be legitimately spoken of as valid or invalid. No. No, false. Statements are true or false. Arguments are valid or invalid, right? And arguments are groups of statements. Number 9, an argument may be legitimately spoken of as true or false. No. Arguments are valid or invalid, sound or unsound, but they're not true or false. They're made up of statements that are true or false, all right? So there's your work from part 2. If any of that raises questions for you, just shoot me some communication.